The cave of the Balazek. The cave of the point like this. You know that since when it was two trees and what, and the guy when the tree dies, he has to uproot it and leave. That's all he's out. He doesn't get a chance to replant it. So this guy figures like this. He says this tree, when it comes to a date palm, okay, he doesn't really have hopes of extending the life of the tree. So suche mase daite, the guy takes his mind off it. In other words, what's the point? Is like this. It's true that a date palm may have growths coming out of the trunk. But as far as this guy's concerned, for him, he doesn't. It does, but he won't. He won't. No, it does, but he won't be expect. He won't care about it. Why? Because what's the whole point? Okay, of getting growths, etc. Here, if you let's say the tree dries at the top, the trees will dry at the top, and then they die. So what can people do is they can cut off the top of the tree and spur new growth. That's a classic thing. I told you, I myself, when I was 17 and I worked on a farm in Eretz Israel. So one of the things they did was, and it was my job, they tricked the trees, the old trees, they're thinking that they're going to die, and then they sprout. They become very fruitful again. They had a way of circling the bark, and so that you make a gap between the bark and itself.
That's like cutting off the whole thing.
You cut it off. And what happened was then the tree puts this massive effort to heal itself, and it before it just manages, instead of dying, it manages to close the gap and keep living. And when it does that, for some reason, it gets a new lease on life and it starts producing fruit again. Yeah, amazing trick. Yeah. So anyway, so over here by normal trees, even when they'll dry at the top, what you do is instead of letting them die, you lop off the top, you cut it lower, and you keep the tree alive, and it has new growth. That's one of the things you do to keep a tree going. But when it comes to palms, it doesn't work like that. The palm trees, it doesn't work. It only grows from the top, and they're not going to. It doesn't work that way. Once they dry at the top, you're not going to extend their growth. So this guy really, he doesn't really feel he's going to have enough time to get any benefit out of the growth, and therefore he's meyayish on them. He gives up on them, and that's why he doesn't own them, because he doesn't really have hopes of getting them. Okay, he's really taken off his mind. Okay, so Maski Lower Papa said, look, if that's the reason, if that's what Rav Nachman meant, he says, what are you talking about? He says the Mishnah said any two trees, okay, all trees, any tree, if it dries up and dies, okay, the guy's gonna take it away. But Kotani nevertheless told me, okay, the person has a right. In other words, the Mishnah didn't differentiate between one tree and another. The Mishnah said all trees, that it's two trees, all trees that eventually are going to dry up and die. He has a right to the growth, and it didn't differentiate between one tree and a palm tree. Therefore, what you're saying can't be true. Amra Papa said, rather, you have to explain. He still agrees that the halacha that Rav Nachman was telling me was that he doesn't have a right to the growth, but it's for a different reason. He says, "Ein lo geza lebal." I agree with you. It is saying that the owner of the tree doesn't have a right to the growth, but for a different reason entirely. Lefisha ein motzi geza, because the truth is that the nature of palm trees is different than other trees. On palm trees, all the branches are at the top, and it doesn't really sprout branches. Right, it doesn't make shoots out from the bottom, and therefore what? So if it just happened this tree was abnormal, was an anomaly, and it made some, he never expected it, and therefore he's meyayish. He agrees to the law, but not for the reason. The first opinion held what that the reason is that he doesn't think he's going to be around long enough to get them, but he knows that they happen. Okay, this way is what he doesn't really even expect it to happen. So if it happens, he gave up on them. The Rav Zavid says, one second, but according to Rav Zavid, who says what? That the point is that he doesn't expect it to hang around long enough. Kasha Bas Nisan, he says, we as we asked before, it's a kasha from our Mishnah, which didn't differentiate between one tree and another. He says the answer is you have to answer. No, he says over there, you know why it included even a palm tree in our Mishnah. The Zav and the Chameshnin, it's where the guy bought it. He had a right to the land for 5 years. He didn't own the land, but he had a right to the land for at least 5 years. For 5 years. For 5 years, it makes no difference. Even a palm tree, he had hopes that he would get shoots out of it, because he would get shoots, and therefore, and therefore they really belong to him. Kana shlosha, kana karka. Now we learn once a person already buys 3 trees, that's called buying an orchard. By definition, he sold them the land. That's what the rabbis thought. How much land does he get? Rav Chia Ba'aba, Rabbi Yochanan says, Hari Zekana, and he gets 3 types of land because of these 3 trees. Tachtayim, the land that is literally specifically just below them. Uveneim, the land between the 3 trees. But and also surrounding each tree, he gets a little circumference, come a little over the salo. The amount that the person, let's say, was a fig picker, a fig tree, so then he would get the amount of space that the picker of figs needs and his basket, and his basket to be able to pick enough room to service the tree. So he gets three areas. Maskiv law, listen 1 second. What you say makes no sense. It makes no sense whatsoever to say that a guy who brought three trees gets rights to a periphery around the tree. It's impossible. He said, why? Hashta, remember we learned we had a machlok between the rabbis and Rabbi Akiva. The rabbis said people sell stingily, and Rabbi Akiva said people sell graciously. Okay, the rabbi said, so the seller always sells the least amount. And the rabbis told us, okay, when a guy bought three trees, the guy has no rights to get if that three plot tree, the orchard that he bought is in the middle of his neighbor's field, the guy doesn't owe him a rights to passage to get there. He has to go, he has to fly, or he has to buy it. He has to buy a right of way. He says, listen, he says, Hashta derech elo. If you see that according to the Chachamim, a guy, we can't even assume that the seller gave him a pathway, which is essentially can't get to the trees without it. He didn't sell him. He says, Ora Basali Yesha is going to give him the convenience of the periphery around the tree. That he could still exist. You can't, if you can't do anything to your trees if you can't get to them. No, that he didn't sell it. But he sold it what he doesn't need. Why? Because you don't absolutely have to have the area around the tree. You can pick the tree from below, you can climb up the tree and pick the whole circumference of the tree. He doesn't need it. So you're going to tell me what is essential to get to the tree. The guy didn't sell him. Yet the guy sold him something not essential, he says. It makes no sense. Now, this is a big machlokes how to read this. I'm going to read this, even though I always usually read it quite to the back, but I'm going to read it the other way. Okay, that this is a teretz. This is a teretz already. He said, this is the Rabbi Yochanan answered him. And he said like that. He answered him. He answered him. He says, the Gemara answers, okay? Pardon me. The Gemara answers. He says, Derech ein lo. He says, understand. He says, you're right. He says, when a guy sells, he sells stingily. And he doesn't give a guy a right to get to it. Okay? The Arach we see, but there's a reason why. Because when you sell three trees, it's essentially an orchard. So I'm one property, you're another property. I'm not giving you rights to go through my property. But he says, he says, okay, he says, listen, your trees are in a different domain, okay, pardon me, pardon me. I'm sorry, yeah, I read wrong. Pardon me, I read in the wrong place. Derech ein lo, okay, derech we see. He has no rights, right? Because that's a different property entirely. And therefore, what? So the guy sold stingily, and he's not letting him through. However, however, he would, but at least that little part he would give him. That part he would give him.
Because, Art Scroll learns.
I know it's the other way. They're learning like.
You're not going to give him anything.
It's a continuation of the question, but the quick answer here, no. The two differences are different. Okay, why? Because because we says because why? Why does he get okay? But okay, that he gets at 2 different points, and 2 different points that he sold him. No, that's really the property he sold him. Amrav Zeira Medira Benu. So in the words of Rabbi Elazar that he said before, Nilmad we learned the following. It's a big argument. You're right. It's a little easier to read your way actually. But okay, Nilmad Shlosha. Okay, we should learn 3. Who the ain't there? When a guy sells 3, he never. When a guy sells a guy 3 trees in the middle of his field, that's an orchard. Then he never sold them the pathway to get there
because we stipulated what he gets.
Because it's a different property.
Right.
That's the main point. Hashnayim, but if it's only 2 trees, Yeshlo, because he has rights. Why? Because then 2 trees is considered on the property of the seller.
The other guy's.
Yeah. So obviously, if he sold him, he has to give him a right to. He has to give him a way to use it. Because he says to him, he says, my trees are on your land. Now, obviously, you must be giving, if you're selling me the trees, you're selling me a way to get there. Amalei Rav Nachman Bar Yitzchak the Rabbi, he says, name Rabbi Elazar, Leslie the Shmuel Rabbi. It must be what? According to the way Rabbi Elazar learned this, according to the rabbis who hold that a person when he sells stingily. But it's very strange because it'll come out that Rabbi Elazar doesn't hold like Shmuel, his Rebbe. We're always surprised when a person can argue with his Rebbe, but we're surprised when the Talmud different than the Rebbe. I actually heard, interestingly enough, in a lot of places in America, they have a problem on Friday nights for various reasons. It's hard for the women to go to the mikveh. Maybe it's a little dangerous, a little this, all these problems. You know what I mean? So usually, usually we don't matter women to go to the mikveh in the daytime for all kinds of reasons. But Rabbi Feinstein's Zitzal allowed them to go on condition that she wouldn't do yichud with her husband until the nighttime. That was a famous psak of Rabbi Feinstein. So it was also apparently it's
also the one day early.
So it became but that you're allowed. It became well known. She goes and then she's with her at night. But anyway, it became known that Rabbi Ephraim Greenblatt, Zitzal, from Memphis, it became known that he asked her. He said no, you can't do it. So I heard Rabbi Fürst, from Chicago, who was like a Talmud Bufak of Rabbi Feinstein. He was on top of every second getting every psak. So he said he was like shocked. He said, "Come on." He says, yeah, tell me that Rabbi Greenblatt passed against his Rebbe. Yeah, he couldn't understand. All right, come on, get out of here. Now, the truth is, a person would be. Talmud can disagree with his Rebbe. It's not like unheard of.
Well, also the circumstances in Memphis were different.
Yeah, I don't even know.
It wasn't so dangerous.
Yeah, who knows? Yeah, who knows? But I heard Rabbi Fierce say, "Come on, tell me, pass against his Rebbe what he did in the Lao." Anyway, but of course it can happen. But Lemaisa, he was surprised. So here he says, listen, he said, why? He said, against his Rabbi Shmuel, the Amar Shmuel, because Shmuel said, Allah like Rabbi Akiva. He said, Allah is like Rabbi Akiva. The Amar Mocher Bain Yafa Mocher. He passed him like Rabbi Akiva. That a person doesn't sell stingily. And if a guy bought 3, the owner still automatically gave him a right away, a passage to go through. Amalei. So Rabbi said to Rav Nachman, he says, no. He says, you're making a mistake. It's not that he paskined against Rabbi Akiva. It's that this Mishnah can only be explained according to the Chachamim. Not that he holds halachas like the Chachamim. This Mishnah must be according to the Chachamim because there's no other way to explain it. Why? Okay. Why? Let me talk about Sneesa and Rabbi Akiva. Our Mishnah will not fit according to Rabbi Akiva. How do I know? It has to be the rabbis. Be the Katani, because since our Mishnah taught let's say the trees grew and the branches were extended out more than the ground that the tree owner owned. Yishapa, okay, so the owner of the land surrounding is allowed to cut them off because they're gonna bother him in his field. The Isaac Adaita Rabbi Akiva, if you hold that our Mishnah is Rabbi Akiva, Amai Yishapa, why should he cut them off? Okay, Amar Mocher Ba'in Yafa Mocher. He said the Mocher sells not stingily. So for the Mocher, if he sold him the 3 trees, he also sold him the rights to have the branches extend over his field. Amarle said, "Nah, get out of here." He says, our Mishnah can be Rabbi Akiva. It's not true what you said. Imodam Rabbi Akiva, he says, when did Rabbi Akiva say his rule that the seller sells graciously? The classical case where we learned it was where the guy sold the middle of his field, he sold the guy a hole, or a cistern, or a cistern. It doesn't destroy the land around it. It doesn't bother him. The hole stays where it is, and it doesn't bother his land. So he gives him Aval Elon Mishawasle. When it comes to a tree definitely bothers him. Why? Because when the branches of the tree extends over his field, 1, he can't plow it. And 2, it stops it from bothers the growing. Mila Modir Rikiva Be'elon. Okay. Mila Modir doesn't Rabbi Akiva agree Be'elon Hanotel Tosada. It's in a classical case where one guy's tree is extending over his friend's field. The neighbor's allowed to cut it. How much? How much should he cut back the branches? He can cut them off up to the height of taking his plow with the banger, with the stick that he hits the animal with. He has to be able to go through. So you see that even Rabbi Akiva holds it when it's damaging. Nobody sells graciously when it's going to damage him. So therefore, what? So our Mishnah could clearly be what? Our Mishnah, and the same thing over here, when the tree branches extend over his field, it bothers the plowing, it bothers the growth of the field, so he's not going to let it. So therefore, what? So it's not necessarily true that it's not necessarily true.
No, that it could even be Rabbi
Yes,
Akiva
yes.
because he would
Yeah,
be made
right,
in
right.
the branch.
Okay, so since it's not necessarily, no, it's the other way. So since it could be Rabbi Akiva, so what we said originally was true, and therefore what? He really paskined against his Rebbe. He paskined like the rabbis against Rabbi Akiva. We learned what we learned earlier about the measurement of how much land the guy gets. We actually learned a brisa that says explicitly like Rabbi Chia bar Abba. Harizakona tachteyem ubeneyem. We learned in a brisa that said the guy bought 3 trees he owns below the trees. Ubeneyem, what's between the trees. The chutzalem, what's surrounding the trees. Kamelo arvasalav. The amount that a person picking figs, or it's really anybody harvesting, and his basket that he needs to service the tree. Rabbi said to Yosef, "Oh son, or Basala, when you told me the guy who's picking in his basket, okay, me, Zor, in that area, you awarded to the owner of the trees, the 3 trees, the middle of that guy's field. He's got an orchard, and you awarded him the picking area around the trees. But who can plant it? Does the owner of the trees plant it? Does the owner of the field plant it? Yeah, what we got to plant it? Amalei, so he said to him, I said, we already learned it. Okay, and coming up, we're going to learn in the Mishnah. Okay, when one guy has a field surrounding his friend's field, okay, and in a case where the inner guy has rights to pass through it, even though the inner guy has rights to a pathway through the outer guy's field, the outer guy can still plant it. The guy will walk on top of it, okay, but he's allowed to plant it. So you see, the rights of planting are to the owner of the field and not to the inner guy. Amar Alei says to me, he says, get out of here. He says, you can't compare our case to that case. He says, okay, awesome, less leipsida. Over there, there's no loss to the middle guy. The outer guy planted it. Doesn't bother him. So the outer guy has a right to plant it. But here, here, the inner guy does have a loss. When the guy plants below it, when his let's say fruit naturally falls from the tree, the fruit's going to get rotten from the water and the filth and the fertilizer. According to the fertilizer. The Amalei says can we not pay period? When my fruit falls under on my own, in that area where I'm allowed to work, it's going to get filthy. Okay. He says, if you're going to compare it to something later, you have to compare it to the end of the mission later when they, by agreement, and basically gave a pathway by agreement of the outer guy and the inner guy down the side of the field. In that case, nobody's allowed to plant it. The outer guy can't plant it, and the inner guy can plant it. Why? Because once it was by agreement, the outer guy has no right to do anything. Okay. And even though it's barely going to hurt the inner guy, it's just going to bother him from walking a little bit. And certainly, okay, and the inner guy can't plant because he has no rights. He only right to pass through. And the same thing over here. Certainly, when they gave the inner guy the right around the trees to use the area enough to pick and for the basket, okay, that's a case where it's similar to a case where both agreed to give him a space. So therefore, both of them are forbidden to plant it. Okay, because there's certainly over here there's really a loss to the inner guy. So certainly the outer guy can't plant it, and the inner guy has no rights. He only had the right to pick and not to plant. Tanya Kabase da Abaya. Okay, we learned like Abaya, or we actually learned the Brisa. We learned the guy acquires beneath the trees and between the trees and outside the tree enough to pick and with the basket. It says explicitly what we said. This one and this, neither of them has a right to plant it, just like he said. Now we have a problem like this. What's considered to be a field? You have to know when trees are planted too close together, it's like a wild growth. They're going to be uprooted. It's not considered an orchard. And when trees are considered far from each other, you don't have to give it. The guy doesn't need all the land in between to nourish the trees. It's too much space. So there has to be a normal ratio of tree to tree to consider it one unit that he gets all that land in between. What's too close together that it's not an orchard, and what's too far away that it's not going to orchard to give them the land in between? What's going to be? Okay, so Amarle, so we had 2 opinions. But how much space do you have to consider that it's an orchard that he gets the land between them? Rabbi Yosef said the name of Rabbi Yehuda in the name of Shmuel. Okay, it can't be less than 4. Less than 4 is too close. It has to be just under 8. Okay, and just under up till 8. Up till 8 is not considered scattered. So it's just the right amount. So it has to be between 4 and not less than 4 and not up to and not more than a little less than 8. Okay, that's considered close enough that it needs all that land, and not so close that it's not that it's not going to be uprooted. Rav Nachman Amar Shmuel. Rav said Rav Nachman, also name of Shmuel. He said Mishmona ba'ad sheshes. No, it's a minimum of 8. Otherwise, it's too close, and all the way up to under 16 is considered to be what? Not scattered. So it's a gigantic argument. Amar le Abai Rav Yosef. Abai said to Rav Yosef, who had gotten ill and forgotten his Torah. He says, some Torah. The Rav Nachman. He said, you shouldn't argue with Rav Nachman. Okay, with Rav Nachman said, really what? But that the number was 8 and 16. Why? That's Tamas Nizakavasi, because we really learned the Brisa. We learned the Mishnah like that, but you got sick and you forgot it. You forgot the Mishnah. But really, what he's reminding him, you don't argue with him. We really have a Mishnah like that. The Tanan, because we learn. And the Tejas can out. We have a rule. You can't plant together a vineyard, let's say with grains or whatever it is. But a vineyard has to be a vineyard. So a vineyard has to be planted properly. Single vines. You have to be 6 tvachim away, one amma. But that's and you're fine. But if it's a vineyard, then you need to have. If it's a vineyard, then you can't plant. So we're going to see. So he says what? He says we learned the following. Anateas karmo. Okay, if your guy planted the rows of his vineyard, sheshesrei amma, so that the rows are 16 amas apart. That's a machlokas we've shown him whether it's from the root or from the branch, but we're going to learn like the Rashbam says it's from the branch. Mutar lavizer l'sham. Okay, once it's 16, you're allowed to plant in between the rows. Why? Because it's not a vineyard. As long as you're going to be an am away, it's fine. It's not a vineyard. Okay. Rabbi Yehuda said, Asayeh. Rabbi Yehuda said in that Mishnah to support the first opinion. Ma'aseh Salmon, what happened in a place called Salmon? The guy planted his vineyard 16 amas apart between the rows, which is already considered what? Already considered scattered. What he did was they did like many people used to do. They would plant each year. They would alternate fields that they would plant. So in a vineyard, what they do is 1 year they plant this side, 1 year they plant that side. So the space between the rows, they plant wheat on one row this year. Let's say row 1, 2, 3, 4. They plant wheat 1 year in 1, 3, 5, 7. Next year 2, 4, 6, 8. So what they would do was, in order to accommodate that they'd be allowed to plant, he would face the branches inwards over the area that he's not planting, so that the area he wants to plant is more to plant. So he said, therefore, what? So it was 16 by 16. So what he'd do was he would always point the branches to inwards to the row, to the row, but to the row that he's not planting. Okay, that year, so that the other row on the other side, okay, is far. The branches are far enough away, so he's allowed to plant. Okay, was there an area? He plant the plowed area. Then the next year, then he would plant. Let's say the next year he pushed the branches to the odd numbers, right? And so now you can plant the even numbers. Okay, Mazar Sabur, now plant the area that hadn't been planted before. Okay, right. And the case came from the Rabbi Veitur. They said it's fine. And knows what? Why? Because if it was, and you see what that he had to turn them. Okay, 16. So you needed what? You needed 16 to call it separate. So you see that 16 is called separate and not 8 is separate. 16 is separate and not 8. Okay, okay. So you see what? So you see he should argue with Rav Nachman. Or later, Rav Yosef said to him, he says, he says, listen, he says, I don't agree with this Mishnah. Because I have a case, okay, where we see that the halacha is different, okay, and we see that it's the only need that 8 is already called separated. But during the Rava, so there was a certain town of shepherds, okay, where a guy sold 3, okay, and three trees, and there was an 8 between them. The Atul Lakamad Yehuda came from Yehuda Varmale, and he said to him, He said, given the land between it, okay, what? Okay, Kamlo Boker Caleb. Okay, as long as you have just enough for the team of oxen and the plow, which is only 4 amos and not 8, like you said. Okay, but I didn't know how much was it. How much is the distance, the minimum distance of the brace of oxen and of the yoke of oxen and the yoke came the shamas lahad. It's not. So once I learned the mission, it said Leita Adam Ilan Samach L'Stechaber Alim Hirch V'Mena Arba Amos. You shouldn't plant the tree like we learned earlier. You can't plant the tree next to your friend's field unless you stay away 4 amos. The Tanil on the Bryce thought it's Arba Amos Shama. We said, what was the purpose of the 4 amos? If they able to secure, that's the amount that you need to work the vine. Okay, there's place with the plow and turn around with the oxen. Amina Shmami no. They say, okay, you can learn from here. No Baka Caleb Arba Amos. So the amount that's considered separate enough, okay, to be an orchard is 4 as opposed to 8. So you see, halachas like me and not like
Rav Nachman.
Right, tradition. Shkol Gadol to everybody. A good day. A wonderful day.
Okay. Good week.
Yeah.
So how's the vision?
Thank God. Thank God. So far, really, it's a gift.
Who'd you go to?
Dr. Belotte, Belotte. Belotte. You heard him? He's around the corner on Glades.
Oh yeah. You know what Belotte means?
No.
Bell, he does a good job.
Yeah.
Lot, he charges for the good job.
That's funny. Thank God.
And then, however, you can read underneath these lines. When I had my
also, I'm getting.
I had to wear sunglasses.
Yeah, I'm getting adjusted to the lights just now. It takes a little time.
They give you those plastic.
Those are useless. But
it takes time. Yeah,
took about 6 months.
I picked up because when they dilate my eyes, I have to drive home. They're very useful.
It's improved.
Yeah.
No, it's
and yet my
improved
regular
everywhere.
sunglasses.
In all
like,
this,
My
if I'm
regular
bending glasses,
sunglasses
it'll
are
be
not dark enough. It's
Okay.
dilated. But those heavy black ones that they give you, that work